I feel like we've spent about 90 to 95% of this offseason talking about Georgia's offense, Gunnar Stockton, Nate Frazier, Zachariah Branch, all these new additions. What's it going to look like? Will it be better than it was a year ago? So let's take a few minutes and let's talk about the defense, because I don't think it's getting a lot of attention. I think that people default to trusting Kirby, trusting Glenn Schumann. That's a pretty good default to rely on when we're talking about these things. And I think Georgia's defense will be very good. It's going to be a very talented unit. It's going to be an experienced unit compared to the last few years of the Georgia Bulldogs defenses that have been extremely successful. And statistically, 2024 ended up being a down year compared to the previous few. So the goal is to get back up to being a top 10 statistical defense, which Georgia simply wasn't. Last year, Greg McElroy had a lot of comments about Georgia's defense. We'll talk about that a little bit. He ranked the college football defenses. It's a little bit harder for me to do that. I can rank the teams a little bit better than I can rank their defenses, but we'll talk about his list. It gives us a good baseline to talk about some of the top units in the country, and obviously there are some really good players that are on some teams that aren't on this list, someone in South Carolina. But Georgia's defense, is it going to be better than it was last year? Right? That's kind of the lame way to put it. That's kind of what this boils down to. Are they going to go back to limiting teams to 10 to 15 points per game? It's tough to do that when you play a bunch of really good teams and some really high-powered offenses and have a difficult schedule. Maybe it's tough to do that if you don't have elite talent in the front seven, which, to be honest, we don't know if Georgia has. You know, there are questions on this defense. There are answers on this defense. I've talked about it some. I will talk about it more. Let's talk about what Greg McElroy had to say about it, and let's talk about potential breakout stars, right? And we'll be talking about breakout stars over the next couple of months more as well this year. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Make sure you're going to our site, dawgpost.com. We got some deals going on at the moment. Magazine coming out soon. There are subscription deals I want you to check out. Articles, right? There's more recruiting scoop on the site than there is on the YouTube. So make sure you're checking out everything Matt's doing as well. This is Georgia was ranked 4th on Greg McElroy's list in terms of defense. That's behind Penn State at 3, Ohio State at 2, and Texas at 1. Texas is going to have some really good players. Now, what's true of all of these units is they lost really good talent to the NFL. When I think about Texas, I think about how they lost the core of what made it arguably the best secondary in college football last season, with Jahdae Barron, who was a first-round pick, and Andrew Makuba, who I think was an early third-round pick to the Eagles. I think he went to the Eagles. I'm blanking on that. But Jahdae Barron, first-round pick for the Denver Broncos. Really good players, but they're going to have Anthony Hill. They brought in big-time talent like Justice Terry, a guy that picked Texas over Georgia. They got a good edge rusher in Trey Moore. They got Colin Simmons. They went to the transfer portal and got Cole Brevard from Purdue and Travis Shaw from UNC, right, to replace some pieces up front. It should be a pretty talented unit. Ohio State returns arguably the best defensive player in college football in Caleb Downs. They've got some other young talent. They brought in Bo Atkinson, one of the top edge rusher, kind of defensive end transfer portal players. He was from UNC. They got Penn State at 3. Now Penn State loses number 2 overall pick, number 3 overall pick, and Abdul Carter. But they've got some good defensive backs. They still have some good edge rushers. It's a solid defensive unit. Georgia loses a ton. It actually loses more than most of these units. When you think about Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, Malachi Starks, Chaz Chambliss, lost Damon Wilson to the transfer portal, lost Dan Jackson. So I think there are actually more questions to be answered on Georgia's defense than some of these other top defenses. And this is what McElroy thinks about it. He says it might be a little controversial because they weren't quite the same last year as they were in years past. But this is partially because he just trusts Kirby Smart. He's one of the best defensive minds in the entire country. Christian Miller is back. He references Christian Miller, the defensive tackle for Georgia. And he's got a chance to be a breakout candidate in the interior defensive line. He could be the next man up as far as a dominant presence there. I do think Christian Miller, one, he will be one of the starters on this defensive line along with Jordan Hall. I do think breakout candidate. I think it's fair to tab him as that. They have his name spelled wrong on this article, which I think is funny. But would you consider KJ Bolden a breakout? Would you consider potentially Janelle Aguero a breakout if he is, in fact, the starter at that nickelback position? They're inside linebackers. There's no need to break out. But will an edge rusher break out like Gabe Harris, or will transfer Ella Madozi from Army be what I think will be an instant impact starter for the Dogs on the edge? Christian Miller certainly could be one of the breakout candidates, and he's a guy that's been around for a while. Only a handful of guys have really been around for that 2022 national championship team. Oscar Delp being one of them, Dalen Everett being one of them, Christian Miller being one of them. They just don't have a ton of players left that are older like that anymore, who saw it, who went through it, and understand exactly what it takes to be a national championship winning team. I do think that there is a ton of value in having players like that, and Christian Miller, entering year 4 in the program, is one of those types of players. Some of the other top defenses, like he's got Clemson ranked number 10 on this list. I do think Clemson, if the secondary holds up, that front seven for Clemson is going to be one of the best in college football. It might be the best. When you think about TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Sammy Brown in that linebacker room, there is a ton of talent in Clemson's front seven, and it's going to have first-round picks. And I do think this is one of the best units. He's got them ranked at number 10. I'm curious to what he has to say about that. Let me just skim it real quick to see if it's worth telling you. No, it doesn't. But he's got Oregon on this list. He's got Michigan on this list. Oklahoma on this list. Referencing Marvin Jones Jr., former Georgia outside linebacker. He's got Alabama on this list. Fair, they've got a lot of young talent. And Notre Dame on this list, who, look, they lost some serious talent to the NFL as well. But that's the case for all of these programs. In terms of Georgia, going back to what McElroy said, kind of the quote I brought to you earlier on in this, is that it's easy to trust a Kirby and a Schumann and a defensive staff that has been getting it done over and over again. Something else I thought he was interesting was he said that the lows of last year for Georgia's defense shouldn't be as low. And it is something you have to question thinking about that is, what was the low? The first half against Alabama, I would say, is one of the low moments against Georgia Tech where they just couldn't tackle. Not amazing against Mississippi State, who ended up being one of the worst teams in the conferences. Other than that, Georgia's defense largely performed. It was a handful of games where it was like, okay, this can't happen. Now, the problem Georgia may run into with that is, okay, well, they got to play Alabama again. There's no Jalen Milroe, but they still have a lot of talent on that offense. They got to go to Auburn. Is that an improved offense? Ole Miss with Austin Simmons replacing Jackson Dart, is that going to be as good? They got to play Florida again with DJ Lagway in year 2, who's getting as much hype as pretty much any quarterback is heading into this stage of his career. They got to play Texas again, who people think may explode on offense with Arch Manning. They got to play Georgia Tech again with Haynes King, losing some of their top weapons. They're still going to have to play really good offenses. It's just a matter of, can they limit those really bad performances? I think the Alabama game and the Georgia Tech game kind of skew it. Defensively, Georgia played pretty well against Notre Dame in the game that it ended up losing. Offensively, it couldn't get it done, and special teams, it got destroyed, right? But defensively, we're talking about, one offensive touchdown for the Irish, and it was on a 13-play drive. It was a 1-play touchdown drive. Other than that, they really didn't get the ball down the field that often. So defensively, statistically, Georgia did regress on that side of the ball. It did hurt Georgia and was a big part of why it lost a couple games. But I actually kind of see the point where, are the lows going to be as low as they were last year? When you think about what happened out in Tuscaloosa and what happened against Georgia Tech and the way it just let Ole Miss fly down the field on it a couple times and completely get a stranglehold of that game, I kind of agree. The lows probably won't be that low again. And sometimes replacing talent's a good thing. There are a lot of talented young players on Georgia's defense that are going to be chomping at the bit to get their chance. Will Elijah Griffin get on the field? Will Isaiah Gibson or Darren Ikanagman, one of those guys, get onto the field? I think the transfers are going to get onto the field. The closer we get to this thing, the more I think Georgia's defense will be one of those 5 best units in college football. So I'm kind of in agreement with what Matt Roy has to say here. If you agree, let us know in the comments down below. And as always, appreciate you watching.